part of Chris's doctorate is to go through certain methods, and they call it training, yeah? But today, if we do what we were doing the other week, which is to offer Chris a response in terms of this idea of the empathetic resonance. So we're looking at the embodied expression and trying to develop, not just in words, but that understanding through the empathy of what Chris is expressing, meaning, then that's empathetic resonance. Now, Marion Dad's put forward the idea of empathetic validity, which is, as we're responding, we're actually checking the validity of what Chris is claiming about her expression of the living, inclusional or inclusive empowerment. Am I making sense of it? Mm-hmm. Yeah? And go on.
Or the empathetic validity, is that meaning that we are actually empathising because we understand this is part of Chris's journey towards her knowledge, and we are seeing that that is valid? Is that it?
That's the idea.
Rather
of the
than it's valid knowledge.
Exactly. The idea of a validation group is that you place before, like us, a claim that you know something. Yeah? And then we actually go through, for example, is it comprehensible? You know, how do we enhance the evidence so that it is strong in terms of justification? You know those 4 points, and then does Chris, and she may not do today because we're just looking at the meaning of this living inclusional, and Chris is trying to distinguish inclusional, inclusive, yeah? So we should hear some greater clarity about that. And then we've got this idea of connecting to the socio-historical and socio-cultural influences, like Chris has gone into all of the policy documents over the past 2 or 3 years that have changed in terms of government policy on looking at inclusion. Yeah? And then the last one is the authenticity. Do we sense that Chris over time is trying to live her values as fully as possible? Are you okay with this? And that, in terms of the formal notion of validation, is how we're helping Chris to put something into her doctorate that has gone through this, and it will be, it is a rigorous process for us all. Are you? Yeah?
Okay. There's a mismatch for me between the word inclusion and inclusional.
Yeah.
This is exactly the point.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. That's why I thought it'd be great to perhaps have that discussion today, because what I'm trying to determine then is okay. I'm talking about living empowerment. Okay, I'm talking about living empowerment, but I'm also looking at an inclusive living empowerment or an inclusional living empowerment. And I'm trying to determine the difference between an inclusive living empowerment and inclusional living empowerment. And I'm trying to thrash out what is the difference between inclusive and inclusional. Are they different? Or could I say it is inclusive and inclusional living empowerment? Or is it one or the other? And I don't really know, because the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm going round in circles.
If you put the words to one side for the moment,
yeah.
It sounds like you have I'm not sure whether you have a clear idea in your mind of what it is you want the word to mean. What's the meaning you're trying to find a word for?
Yeah. You see,
and then you can just say, actually, when I say inclusion,
yes.
I mean...
Yes. That's interesting, because I met Marie and Jack yesterday, and this is exactly the sort of thing that I think Jack Marie said this, that I have got to determine what inclusion is, what inclusion is, and then state, this is the meaning sort of I'm working with.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
But at the moment, this is what I'm trying to thrash out for myself, what I mean by it. And I'm really not quite sure. Another thing that Jack highlighted yesterday, which I thought was really interesting, that that really I need to, what I'm saying is inclusive, inclusional, has to be sort of demonstrated in the way that I express myself, sort of my embodied expression of inclusive and inclusional. What is my embodied expression And I think, Jack, you suggested that perhaps would be a good thing to start with. Looking
very much so. That in the here and now, I was saying last week, I felt I understood Chris's expression of living empowerment. At the moment when Chris did this with her body, and it's on the video clip, it felt she was expressing living empowerment, having been, if you like, told by a supervisor in the transfer seminar that the way she should clarify her meaning of empowerment was go to the academic literature. And so that the definition was going to come out of the academic literature. Chris responds in a way which not only resists, but is very clear that her meaning is embodied and she does this, right? And I said last week, but I'm not sure about the meaning of living inclusional. And we've talked again about the inclusive, didn't we? So maybe we could just check with people that as you were doing that, Chris, are we, if you like, in terms of this empathetic resonance, and as Chris expresses herself, that we're relatively, if you like, clear about her meanings of the living empowerment? That's what I think the first question might be. And then we go on to this confusion, and it's right, there should be confusion because we're not clear. What does the inclusional or inclusive, or inclusion, we've got about 3 different words. Is that okay in terms of, do you sense that you're the empathetic resonance as Chris addresses us? Do we feel her sense, if you like, of living empowerment? Because as she's doing this even in the here and now, and this will be on the video, it's almost identical to her expression in the transfer seminar when you're expressing yourself with that sense of empowerment. And then we might get closer to the idea of inclusion. Are you okay with this? Because that relational dynamic that I think Chris sets up, if you like, it doesn't feel to me to be exclusive. In other words, I feel included now, here, but with Chris, in the very way, her way of being, is one of bringing us, it feels, all in with communication. But can we talk about that sort of thing?
I feel included in the inquiry. I feel almost an element of pain, but I have to check that with you, Chris, that it's quite a painful process that you're struggling with, and that's what I'm picking up at the moment.
I think I've been trying to sort of work this out.
Beyond.
Yeah, I think I've been trying to work this out for a while, and I thought I was quite clear because in the beginning, when through discussions with Jack and Marie, I said, oh yes, that my PhD is about inclusive and inclusional living empowerment, quite blasé. And at the time I was quite comfortable with that, but it's only when I started sort of trying to analyse and through discussions with Marie and Jack, whereby they'd be asking me, well, what do you mean? Do you mean inclusive and inclusional? Do you mean inclusive living empowerment, inclusional living empowerment? And I'm struggling to define...
Can you tell us how the words could be used?
Pardon?
So can you tell us how, because it's part of your job title, isn't it, inclusion, or it was?
It was.
It was.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, just sometimes when you're trying to get to something, it helps to go through a lot of stuff that you kind of think, no, not that, but you need to...
Okay.
But so what could it mean? So let's start with inclusive,
okay,
that
let's go
seems
back
easier.
Then. If I go back to my Masters, I talked about this in my Masters,
yes.
Because then I was an inclusion officer, and it was how can I improve my practice as an inclusion officer. And then I was quite clear, because I was doing the inclusion quality mark, leading on the inclusion quality mark, and looking at inclusive practice in schools, and for me then, a sort of inclusive, a school, for example, would be one. I initially started off thinking, oh yes, have they got a buddy bench? Oh great, that's lovely for the children, we can tick that, they've got a buddy bench. Do the children have reading partners? Oh great, that's inclusive, we can tick that little box, and that's great. And it was, as I was going through my Masters and going into schools, I thought, no, this is just a tick box exercise.
But what were the feelings that the buddy bench and the reading partners, what were the feelings and the all values that represented to you?
Of children being included, feeling included,
Feeling belonging?
getting support, a sense of belonging, a sense of support from their peers, and
So is inclusive, I mean, I've got no idea about inclusion on that, but does an inclusive school, or whatever the title is nowadays, does it mean everybody within the school feels part of it, feels a sense of belonging and a sense of self-worth, because from that comes the ability to contribute, the ability to be, if you're part of something, you know that your voice will be listened to in just as much as you would listen to other people's voices.
Yes.
Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. And as I moved on in my masters, I started to realise that these were just tick box things, okay, but represented something a lot deeper than that. And what I came to determine regarding an inclusive school really is very much more to do with the ethos of the school. And what I determined, it wasn't only about children, because for me, what I discovered was, through the work that I did with schools, it wasn't only about, if a school was truly inclusive, it was also about the inclusion of the whole school community.
Everybody.
It was about the inclusion of the staff.
And the staff,
you know, you
and the
can't have an
parents
inclusive
and
school, I determined, if we had just buddy partners and benches and all this for the children. It was to do with the fundamental ethos of the school, whereby the whole of the staff were included. You know, SMSAs. How were they being valued in the school?
Is it a
An
dinner
SMSA
lady?
is a school
Dinner
meal
lady?
supervisory assistant. You know, dinner lady. Yeah, that's right, dinner lady. And teaching assistants, how were they being valued? I went into one school whereby the caretaker came up to me when I was going around the school and said, I think I've told you this, he was removing the scuff marks off the walls, and he said, I take such pride in taking the scuff marks off the walls, he said, because, you know, it gives the children a sense of pride in it. And it was through experiences like that, you know, that caretaker really felt a part of the community, the school and it input. So I moved a lot in my masters when it came to inclusive, and it was very much ultimately to do with the vision of the head teacher and how that ethos or culture of inclusion was embedded within the whole school. Okay? So that's talking about schools.
Just a bit of slippage now, because you actually use the word inclusive.
Yes.
Just as you finished.
Yeah.
The question was, how do I improve my practice as inclusion officer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm just curious if I can be really clear about these differences, because we've got inclusive, inclusional, and inclusion. Yeah. So we've got three.
Well, inclusive is an adjective, isn't it? Inclusion is about
it's a form of
an
language.
Inclusion
is
is
Alan
a form of
Rayner's
language.
concept.
It is natural.
It's a what?
Alan Rayner.
An
What
inclusionalist comes from Alan Rayner's concept,
you.
which includes, for me, my understanding of the living boundaries, within and without, and I think that's where the Brené Brown that Deborah brought in, there's knowledge within there that may be useful to explain the influence of your internal living inclusional boundaries.
And is there anything in your notion that, if you like, accepts exclusion? So you're working with the notion of inclusive or inclusional. Yet I know schools, a lot of them, that have literally had to exclude. Now, do you have any notion of that in terms of boundaries? Are you with me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I attended a course once around inclusion, and at some point we were asked around whether full inclusion was something to be wished for and things like that. And then the facilitator actually asked very different questions around inclusion, about, you know, whether you would, this thing about boundaries and limits, where do you draw the line around whether you include people who actually really want to harm others, and you know, he really challenged our thinking to kind of, because we think of inclusion as kind of, you know, yes, it's a positive thing, but then to what point? Sort of, would you, without not saying that you don't recognise other opinions, but to what point? So that issue around having to exclude, or you know, which obviously is not what you want to do, but.
Yes. An interesting question
You
is...
have to have no, otherwise your yes has no value. So yes, of course there has to be exclusion, but it's not, it's that, you know, it's all of the stuff that we all know, it's the behaviour, not the person. You're saying within our community, we don't do these things. We want you to be part of our community, but we don't do these things. And because otherwise, being part of our community, if you just have to say yes all the time, it's like, well, everybody's a winner and we're all the best, and you know, you just lose purpose.
I mean, a good question would be, can an inclusive school, would they exclude a child, or would they be described as inclusive if they permanently excluded a child? You know, that's a question. Could they...
Well, yes, because if you've got no, the yes has no value.
So maybe there's a concept of exclusionality.
Yeah, this is why I'm asking.
Yeah,
because I think. Sorry, go on.
I see inclusional as a movement, as a kind of moving thing,
process.
that you are trying to develop that.
Yes.
And obviously, you know, because I think that has to do with values, you know, if you kind of include or you accept, it's not kind of, you want to include. I like your way about, you know, you want to include the people, not the behaviour or whatever, then you would be really destroying or not standing for the values that, you know, that are key, really.
So Rachel, can we just, that was the third meaning, okay? If we're just very careful now, because Joanna said inclusional, as far as I understand what you said, implies or involves a movement, yeah?
Yes,
Now,
that's
now,
a
again,
moving thing that is not kind of...
Yeah, so I'm just asking us to be very careful about it, because I like that very much. But anyway, sorry, Rachel, sorry.
Yes.
No,
Were
you
you
were
going to say something?
I have an embodied experience of my understanding of an inclusional school. And I was going to bring some writing today, but it's that thing that you didn't. My mother was the deputy head of a school, and it was in the days when they were called physically handicapped. She was the deputy head of a school for physically handicapped children. And I used to fear, there's a daughter, that when she retired, I said, I'm glad you've retired because I've got my mum back now. As my mum is she's just gone into a care home, she's got dementia, and the question is, how can we relive how can we keep her memory going in an inclusional way so I can help the care staff? And the day before yesterday, I found her retirement letters from the children. And these letters are extraordinary in terms of how they express the love that was in the school, that was a partnership between the headmaster and my mum that could not be replicated. And one of the sadnesses, a massive sadness, was that when the headmaster retired, Mum went for the headship and she didn't get it because this partnership could never be replicated. And it was at the time in the 80s when schools were run, there was still prejudice, there was still exclusion because these were handicapped schools, not normal schools. And Mum used to very much say, there's not a normal school, we have special schools and ordinary schools. And so that was an example of how her understanding of changing what's normal to ordinary. And this special school was special. The cook was called Mrs. Tummy and was included in everything. And I used to go and help at school, and they used to not care. Now, I was the deputy head's daughter. Would that be allowed these days, just to go and help in the kitchen? And I used to help Mrs. Tummy. And
as long as the risk assessment has been done.
And the difference was there was at that time when the values changed from being a school run by love and compassion to a school run by legislation and all that sort of stuff.
So, could I ask then, does your notion of what is inclusive or inclusional, we must work, I think, with that idea of movement to get the inclusional, but you've just brought in that love and compassion. And I think we might just follow with Chris that the values that maybe are coming into what Chris is meaning by inclusion. Sorry. Am I making sense to you?
So what I'm not getting is the love and compassion from what Chris is saying.
Yeah.
What Jen was saying was that it's a moving thing. So the love and compassion that was generated in the 80s is still moving, because it's moving through these children, through their written words, now being passed on to care home staff.
Sorry. Okay, yes. Sorry about that.
My apologies.
Yes, go.
Passed on by care
Care home
staff.
staff.
There's a kind of
The love
energy
and
that's
So the
passing
love
from
and
generation to
compassion
generation.
is an energy of which has movement.
Yeah.
And that's something that changes, that when, and we'll say one, not I or me, when one is operating from an inclusional position, one's living boundaries are the bit where it's in the space in between, the relationship between me, you and the other.
Yeah. Sorry.
I don't know whether this is, because that was what I did when I worked with Baines, it was excluded, kids that had been permanently excluded.
Yeah.
And it's a really important question that you ask, can you be in an inclusive school and permanently exclude somebody? And I think the answer is yes, because if you say to this child, this school can't meet your needs, you need something that we're not able to give within our school, but you continue to take responsibility for the child. My understanding of the way the system changed after I left was that the school remained responsible and accountable, but the accountable is obviously the team. But if the child is then given opportunities that the school couldn't, they're all so different, you know what I mean? But certainly permanently excluding a child who then gets no education, no, that's not. But it's part of the joined upness, isn't it? It's a part of the fact that we are all joined up.
Yeah.
Everything connects, and you can't. It's like in Marge Piercy when the tram travelling woman says, there's a woman on the edge of time, and she says, something about throwing stuff away. And the person from the future says, well, but there is no away. The world is round. Where is away? And it's the same with children. You can't exclude them unless you're going to put them down.
Yeah.
You can't exclude them totally. You have to try and find. So in Bristol, there used to be the place, Dave White's and Brockington. There used to be a place, there have been, in my lifetime, places where kids who couldn't cope in a school for very good reasons, just like there are people who can't cope in society for very good reasons, are given the help and support they need to be able to fulfil their potential, whatever that turns out to be. That's the inclusiveness.
Yeah.
But also, could I ask again, because it will be useful, I think, if we ask Chris to come back.
Yes.
With the ongoing conversation, having perhaps viewed this conversation with those points, that sense of movement,
Yes.
the love and the compassion. And also, I hope, Chris, you're getting that sense of, if you like, you're communicating that sense of the living empowerment, which we've seen on the video, but also today. And then to try and help us to get a deeper understanding of what it is meaning to you, as you take in these insights. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, go on.
There's two images keep coming back into my mind. One is the idea of a family as a metaphor for a school or any other institution. One of the articles in that journal I wrote, and I quoted from this maverick GP in London I've mentioned a few times, David Sealand, who wrote an article called Family or Factory. And the strength of that, I think, is because people can then think, oh yes, factory, conveyor belts and stuff, and family, with all its faults, it works the way it does in a muddly, complex, dynamic, constantly changing, not, for the most part, regimented sort of way. And that sort of metaphor could be used to communicate, because you're wanting to communicate what's in, and I'm doing it now, you want to communicate what's in here and put it out. And for me, it's not so much finding the right word, it's finding the metaphor and saying, my shorthand for this metaphor is this word.
Yes, that's good.
And I wonder what because there's something that happened last week that is resonant for me with what happens in the first video that I watched of you, when you were talking about as a child, you decided you wanted to become a teacher because you'd been humiliated and you went, I'm going to do it right. That's not this. So if you had a comparison between that motivation that said what's that right, which goes alongside, instead of right, there's a line there and there's a line, the other side of the line is right and wrong. Actually, there was something that you said, instead of saying right, the word is wait. There's something wait, and it's then what is right for you now in words that would clarify your meaning.
The other image that kept coming into my mind was conductor of an orchestra.
Yes.
That the conductor does this. Yes, they move their hands in a rhythmic way.
Yes.
Also, they're either doing this or they're doing that, or they're doing this.
Yes.
Because it's the only way. And they're communicating the soul of the music as they understand it to the performers who see that, take it in, and this incredibly complicated physical action that they do, because they're professional musicians, it goes straight from soul via the hands to the soul and out into the hands again. And it, somehow using language, however inadequately, to capture some of that.
I don't know, I've got a feeling that I continually, I'm not saying it's not necessary, but leave it that you're going to look at sense of meanings of inclusive inclusion or inclusional. It's rather than what sense you're communicating, what images, events, feelings are evoked in you when you talk about living inclusional empowerment rather than living inclusive empowerment. It feels a bit as though trying to understand a spider by picking up its legs and looking at each leg. Yeah.
Good fun.
I just wonder whether rather than now trying to pick out the words, thinking, do I have an example of where I feel that this is communicating, using the words as metaphor of living inclusive empowerment, or actually is this better communicated for me through living inclusional empowerment? And then you have stories to help us understand which feels better for you.
Is that okay? Because you've got one video which immediately came to mind. There's Chris running a workshop with teachers. And it's actually on creativity. There comes a point where they're throwing eggs, right? And they're trusting each other sufficiently that the teachers are actually catching these eggs. But at that moment, I think Chris, the recognition is there, and the way in which everybody's moving, because there's fear involved in this. But that could be an illustration of where you take something from your master's dissertation, you're using it in a different way for your doctorate. So,
Can I say something about because everybody's been doing a lot about hands. For me, and it would be interesting to go back and watch the video, but when you were talking, you did this, like, as though inclusional meant something about how I feel included here, but then you went on to talk about this. So to me, I'd like to know, in stories, or as we talked about, what is this and what is this? Because, exactly, and well, I can say lots of things that I think it is, but I think you've got lots of evidence of what this would be and what this would be. And to me, that would be your definition of whichever word you come down to.
And the definition, the definitions that you particularly want to refer to, you refer to in the glossary.
Yeah.
You say, you know, as you're writing, you say inclusional. Say you refer to an inclusional aspect of working with Nigel. Inclusional means, in this respect, refer to glossary.
Yeah, it
Because-
might be, but you
because
might have
all
a whole
words-
story
very clear
around
about
it.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
it might be part of your full text.
And all,
Yeah,
and
it might be
all,
longer than
because all words are open to interpretation.
Yes, yeah,
In
absolutely. And this is what I need to be very, very clear
So
about,
it
because
is.
as you say, you know, everybody perhaps has a different idea of what
Yeah.
inclusive is and what inclusion is.
Can mean
So if I'm going to
several
use
different
these
things in different
words,
contexts.
people will be putting their own interpretations
sharp.
on it. I need to be very clear.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Your thesis. It's getting too painful.
Well, no,
I like it.
Isn't that
Yeah.
what your thesis is concerned?
Shared with you.
It's rather than
It's what-
this definition, it's actually
And what he's
saying
been doing recently.
emotional.
No, sorry. The first professor of philosophy at London Institute was called Louis Arnold Reed, and I went to see him when he was 84. He said, he'd written a paper that he sent to me, and he said, look, there are three ways, if you like, of coming to know. There's no that, which is the propositional. There's no how, and those were the two that the philosophers were using. But he said, look, there's also no this. And the know this was with the direct object, and he used music as the example, that you know it, yeah? And it's that direct communication. When you said this, and you went here, and then there, so he used, what is this? Yeah? And what does this? And I think that if we focus in on that, we'd get much closer to your meanings. But it's like William was saying about that music, it calls it kenosis, it's the direct knowing, which is your, okay, what do you mean? Yeah? So maybe, sorry.
I
There's a
can
third
go.
bit somewhere between, is there? Between where Chris is feeling here and here. It's the interrelationship.
I think that might be the hit, because in order to get from here to here, you need and this was the empowerment.
I don't think it's getting from one to the other, I think it is.
I think they're joined, but I think there's something about your feeling include.
Yeah.
In order to be inclusive, you in some sense need to feel included and confident that you could empower somebody else to feel in that space. So to me, these words are going to join together in some way, and you need in some... We talk a lot about just living theory in general, and how do you expand the influence of living theory when there's a kind of closing off, and that's partly because it's very difficult to increase an influence when you feel it not included. You know, you feel, you know, whatever you're going to do about it, but you're either going to hide, or you're going to fight, or you're going to do whatever it is. But if you feel like this, you can empower and create this. And so I feel like that could be why those words particularly together are so important, because what is the point of this if you're not taking, you know, and kind of and so I think it's
the embodied feeling in you.
it does, and how I don't think you would. It was something about, and then it comes down to this, you know, that I found You won't do that to me. You're not going to exclude me. I am going to make sure that I am okay here, and that I'm going to help other people to be okay here. And so, you know, there's a lot in that, but you really need to me, is the feeling.
Can I just can I just extend the musical metaphor? Because instinctively, I like the word inclusion. And
I
try
like
to
that.
work out,
I
why
do.
And I think it's actually in 6/8 rhythm.
Yeah.
So da da
6/8
da
rhythm.
da 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 da.
Oh, right.
It's a dance rhythm. 1 2 3 1 2 3, or 1 2 3 4 5 6. 1 2 3 4 5 6. Da. Inclusion. And so it's a dance rhythm, and it evokes dance. It has that jumpiness about it, not jumpiness, but a beautiful,
Energy.
joyful energy.
Yeah, yeah.
And in the end, that's what words are.
Yes.
But that's just the poetry of the word.
It's the
Yes,
poetry.
yes.
It's the poetry of the word.
So you need
Right,
the,
it's
you know, the
lilting.
right brain in
Yes.
McGilchrist. The right brain does that sort of metaphorical, poetic, dance and moving,
Yes.
and the left brain's always limping behind. And you take what the right brain is saying. This is the right thing. This is the right thing. Da 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 da. And then you try and just say, okay, left brain, use that word when the right brain is telling you to do such and such. That's the word you use.
William, I'm going to put you in my PhD. I can't miss that.
Chris, look at that clip of you in that transfer,
Yes.
and you are expressing that of what it was that Sonia
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
that flow
Yeah.
isn't within. Sorry, I don't think it is just the non-verbal communication. It's actually the flow between, and it's
Yeah.
that sense I have that you are actually securing yourself in a way that doesn't deny the other, but actually there's a flowing relationship between that you are not going to deny, you're not denying them, but there is a space of connection between you. And I think I see it in that,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that notion of a living inclusional
Yeah.
empowerment,
Yeah. Yeah.
rather than just a
But
living.
it's also the video, I'll have it up this afternoon, is the fact that we've been responding. I felt an energy in our responses
Yeah.
that actually what this has evoked in us
Yeah.
is also that living
Yes.
inclusion empowerment. So there's
Yes.
something about us together today
Yes.
which is connected
No,
to your
really
meaning.
fantastic. Because in my heart of hearts, whatever, I like the word inclusional. For me, that sums up what I think that I'm about. But in trying to explain it, I've had that problem. I think the word inclusive is cold, and it captures what you've been saying, and what you've been saying as well, William, about inclusional. There's something about the word inclusional that I feel is what I'm about, and it's very much to do, it's a relational thing more. It's
And it can change. I think that's the.
it's a moving,
when
as
you
you've
say
said, you
an
are.
inclusive
It's,
school is like that's it. You are inclusive now. No, you're not, because unless you keep that movement,
yeah.
you stop being.
Yeah.
You only be by living it. Isn't
Yes,
it?
yes.
And that's why that movement
Yes.
to me makes a lot of sense.
Yes, inclusive is hard, cold. I mean, okay, I need to express it better, I suppose. But inclusional
It's
is more.
closed.
Pardon?
It's closed.
Yeah, it's closed. It's, I don't know. It's a shut up. It's like
It's
a
like
tick box on.
Joe just said, you're there. You're either there or you're not. You're either
Yes.
inclusive or you're not.
Yes, yes,
Whereas inclusional feels more like
But you need a verb.
you're
Yeah.
you're
So
like you say, it's
inclusive is an
movement.
adjective.
You're continuing on a
Which is
journey.
right,
It's
which is a
not.
thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
Right.
depending,
What you need is
depending
an
on what
adverb.
context you use it, and that will refer to the glossary.
yes,
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
important that Deborah just said about
Yeah.
the grammar of the line.
Inclusive is an
Yeah.
adjective that describes a noun,
yes,
and they are a noun.
yes,
Is a thing. Is a thing.
yes,
But what you need is an adverb. So that's presumably what inclusional is, because it's a verb, because it's a movement, it's a process, it's an action.
yeah, yeah.
Is it not?
No, does that not make
Well,
sense?
it makes sense to me.
It makes sense to me. Go on, Rachel.
I think when you refer to it in terms of a theory, Sorry.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah, your voice has gone all deep. Straight, so.
For me, it's been really painful. I would say painful. Sitting here, I've started to get really contorted, and it was the idea of this Aristotle and 2,000 years ago. A book that really influenced me was a book called Power and Sex by Cyril Elworthy, which was about power with instead of power over.
Mm.
And it went back 25,000 years to the goddess and all the rest of it. And we haven't included in what we've been talking about the gender difference. And the idea that the embodied knowledge came when men didn't understand their part in creation.
Yes.
And so when Maria's saying you've got this sense of Maria's sitting there in a very different posture, and there's a stillness, the living boundaries for me feel very still when I connect that. What the word that was coming to me when we were talking about this is that actually when you're talking inclusionally, which has happened intermittently during this meeting, I have felt my whole self has been included. Therefore, I've felt a sense of ease, that I've been able to contribute and feel included.
Yes.
When it's all got heady because we've been in Aristotle, prove this, prove that, we get up here, the language becomes up here, and we're all in our heads, and we've forgotten that deep sense of where we're coming from, and that stillness within then it allows somebody else to be, their whole self to be included in that space in front, which includes silence.
Yes. Yes.
And you've also brought in inclusionally. So okay, so we've got 4 words.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so are you okay with this now? I'll have this
absolutely.
afternoon.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hopefully
That's been so helpful.
That's it.
Thank you so much, honestly, because I'm just going round in circles with these words and listening to what everybody has said here today has been really, really helpful for me in shifting my understanding on. And I think I'm going more with the inclusional. Definitely, yeah. Thank you.
I think pre-Rainer, you use inclusionality a lot. Post-Rainer, you have to refer to our indigenous work, because it is the theory of inclusionality that you're dealing with.
Yes.
Because you met Alan, you've been in discussions with Alan over many years. So, in a way, even if that reference to Alan's work is, there's stuff there that you disagree with, which is perfectly valid. So you have to include it post-Rainer.
Yes.
You can't talk about, no one I don't think can talk about inclusionality without referring to
Yeah, absolutely.
Are we okay to develop this?
Yeah.
We can take it up from that. Yeah.